What kind of image could bring a pope to his knees, trembling and begging God for forgiveness? Well, that's exactly what happened in 1541 when Michelangelo unveiled a work so powerful it shook even the Catholic Church's leader. The 1500s were a time of turmoil. The Protestant Reformation was spreading, and the authority of Rome was under fire. At the center of this storm stood Pope Paul III, determined to restore faith and inspire the church to do that. He turned to Michelangelo, an aging genius whose vision will not just decorate the Sistine Chapel, but confront the world with eternity. Today, I want to take you inside that story. In 1541, one piece of artwork sent shockwaves through the Catholic Church. It sparked awe, fear, and fierce debate. But before we see it, let's step into Michelangelo's world. Who was this man who dared to put eternity on plaster? What drove him to fill an entire wall with visions of salvation and damnation? And what questions did his work raise about faith, morality, and judgment? These are the tensions that shape not only the art, but the very era in which it was born. By the time Michelangelo took on this commission, he was nearly 60 years old. He had already painted the Sistine ceilings decades earlier and still thought of himself more of a sculptor than a painter. He was wary, often frustrated by papal politics, but his genius had only sharpened with age. He put himself into these new tasks with relentless energy. What he created was raw, muscular, and deeply human. It was not polished elegance, it was a struggle, shaped by faith, fear, and the weight of mortality. Here is where we're headed. We'll begin with the legend and the moment of its unveiling. Then we'll look at Michelangelo's vision and artistic journey. After that, we'll go inside the fresco itself and explore its details. We'll talk about the faith and the debate that is stirred, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with its lasting impact and why it still matters today. Here it is, Michelangelo's The Last Judgment, a fresco covering the entire altar wall of the Sistine Chapel. Unveiled in 1541, it was one of the most dramatic statements of the Renaissance. It stunned viewers then, and it continues to challenge and inspire people today. At the center stands Christ, not as a gentle shepherd, but as a commanding judge. Saints rise with the wounds of their persecution. Angels trumpet the resurrection, and below, the damned are dragged into hell. Their faces are twisted with terror. The entire wall seems alive. Souls ascending, others are falling. Eternity is folding right before your eyes. In the next slide, we'll step inside this masterpiece, into Michelangelo's vision, the details of the fresco, and the debates it sparked. Michelangelo was already famous for the Sistine Chapel ceilings and his sculpture of David. But years later, he was called back to paint the altar wall, commissioned in 1534 and completed in 1541. The Last Judgment shows a dramatic shift in his style, from celebrating creation on the ceiling to confronting judgment and destiny on the wall. But this bold new vision stirred debate. Many praised it as divine inspiration, while others condemned it as scandalous. Too many nudes, too much raw humanity for sacred walls, critics said. The Council of Trent even demanded reforms, calling for modesty in religious art. In the middle of it all, Michelangelo's fresco stood like a mirror, forcing both leaders and worshippers to wrestle with questions of faith, morality, and eternity. This is the Last Judgment in all its power. At the center, Christ raises his arm as a judge deciding the fate of every soul. Beside him, Mary almost turns away from the weight of the moment. On the left, the saved rise upward towards heaven. On the right, the damned are dragged down into hell. The whole fresco feels alive. Angels blowing trumpets, bodies rising from graves, demons pulling souls under. It is chaos and beauty combined, designed to make viewers stop, reflect on their own destiny. Nearly 5 centuries later, it still has the same effect. Tourists, scholars, and believers alike fall silent before it. Some feel in awe, some feel discomfort, but no one walks away untouched. Michelangelo's masterpiece continues to ask the same timeless question: where do you stand in the story of judgment? But the impact didn't stop at all. Many were stunned by the boldness of Michelangelo's vision, especially the sheer nudity of so many figures. For some, it was daring celebration of the human form. For others, it was scandalous, even indecent for sacred walls. Church officials demanded changes, and eventually draperies were painted over the bodies, earning the artist who added the mocking nickname the breeches painter. This controversy reminds us of how provocative the Last Judgment truly was. It didn't just stir artistic debate, it forced the church itself to confront uncomfortable questions about art, morality, and the very meaning of faith. Here, we see the other side of Michelangelo's vision: the hope. Souls struggle upward, some pulling themselves from their graves, others lifted by the strength of angels. It is the journey from struggle to grace to salvation. Michelangelo shows us raw, human effort reaching towards the divine, balanced by the mercy that lifts them higher. Every figure tells a story of persistence and redemption. In the midst of chaos and judgment, there is also movement towards light. This part of the fresco reminds us that even in the weight of judgment, grace is never out of reach. It is both humbling and deeply inspiring. Michelangelo's The Last Judgment is more than a painting, it is a cultural force. For nearly 5 centuries, it has shaped how we imagine morality, destiny, and faith. Its influence extends far beyond the Renaissance, inspiring artists, theologians, and ordinary people who encounter it even today. For me, seeing it in person was unforgettable. Standing in the Sistine Chapel, I was reminded that art, at its best, doesn't just decorate walls. It speaks to the soul. Michelangelo's fresco still does exactly that. It confronts us, comforts us, and challenges us, and it leaves every viewer with the same timeless question. If you stood before the Last Judgment, where would you be? Coming from El Salvador and being raised a Catholic, the Last Judgment carries a special meaning for me. My grandmother, a woman of faith, often spoke about Rome, the Vatican, and also the Pope, and the stories of the New Testament as well. She was never able to travel herself, but when I was finally standing before this fresco, I felt as though I was carrying her prayers and our conversations with me. Sharing that experience with my wife, also a woman of faith, and with my children made it even more profound. For me, this masterpiece became more than artwork. It became a bridge between faith, family, and history, turning generations and conversations into a moment of present connection and legacy.